I'm John Atack.
I'm Sam Atack.
And we're going to talk about authoritarianism. And you'd better listen,
Yeah.
or the thought police will come round and give you funny dreams.
Okay.
It pointed out to me by my dear friend Jessica, that the word authoritarian has two meanings. The first one,
I want to be the boss of you.
is I want to be the boss of you, which we could call Führer mode.
Yeah, that's the word for it.
And the second one is...
I want to be bossed about.
Exactly. Now, to me, that's a continuum. That you need these two kinds of people. And it made me think about Edward Bernays, the inventor of public relations. There was Ivy Lee as well, if we're going to get... So I know somebody's going to write in the comments otherwise, but they're the two inventors. Nobody expects the two inventors of... but the one who wrote about it, Ivy Lee, was careful to keep quiet about it after he'd covered up the murders committed by Esso, Exxon, whatever we call it.
Just
Standard
changed
Oil.
then.
Yeah, well, they did. And they created the Mother Jones myth that this woman who was an incredibly positive, socially committed woman in her 80s, Ivy Lee described her as a brothel keeper.
Oh, mudslinging.
Yeah, mudslinging. Or public relations. So, Edward Bernays insisted that public relations was the wrong term and it should be called propaganda. And I think he was right. He also pointed out that Joseph Goebbels, who people think invented propaganda, was simply using the book written in the 1920s by Edward Bernays. And he said, oh, that's one of my techniques. That's good. Bernays exemplifies what I call patrician capitalism. And I'm not against capitalism as such, the use of money, the use of capital. But I am against patrician capitalism, which is the form of it we have. And so what Bernays said was, when people are educated enough to make decisions, then we can have democracy. But until that time, and 100 years have passed, and we still haven't actually come to the point where we proles, plebs, deserve to have our opinions heard. And instead we are governed by a group of people who I term technically as idiots. For the most part. It's not entirely true. There are some extremely good, committed, decent politicians, but the scum rises to the top. And looking at the leaders that we have, Shinzo Abe, Duterte, Bolsonaro, Scummo, as he's called in Australia, Scott Morrison, their premier. There are some pretty, vile bodies out there. People who are authoritarian. They believe in their right to be in charge, and they use propaganda to maintain that. Propaganda, that's lying.
Yeah.
Now, what it should be is, in public relations, is being truthful.
Yeah.
Telling the truth about your product or your personality, and being honourable. But it isn't. And by becoming a profession, it's made nearly all politicians deceptive. So the Labour government that Margaret Thatcher overthrew in 1979, the government of James Callaghan said the Labour Party will never use a public relations agency. That didn't prove to be true. In fact, by the time Labour finally got into power in 1997 again, after a fairly long break from 1979, the thing they mainly used was a public relations agency. In fact, there were more famous Philip Gould, Derek Draper, Alistair Campbell, there were more famous spin doctors than there were politicians, Mandelson. And they tailored everything to fit the public perception, and we've got a bit too much of that going on, with them using words like transparent. We'll be thoroughly transparent. They're not. They're liars. And they're promoting a kind of authoritarianism. So should grown-up human beings have a say in what happens to them?
Yes.
How would you know? You're not grown up.
Yeah, you're right. I won't say.
See, I'm allowed to disagree with you.
Yeah. No.
And we don't. We, as Lord Hailsham, Quentin Hogg, as he was before he became a lord, who was a minister in several Conservative governments in this country, Tory governments, he said, and he's right of centre, okay? Oh no, that's right of centre.
Yeah.
Sorry, get them confused. Mirror images. Stage right of
Oh, you're
centre.
looking.
Stage
Yeah,
right of centre.
stage.
He was a right of centre politician, and he explained that we live in an elective dictatorship because every 4 or 5 years we select new dictators, and they make the rules and they do the stuff. And we need to go more towards the virtual Taiwan model, which has emerged out of nowhere, saying, well, you can actually get people. You shouldn't have a plebiscite on every issue. That is getting a bit silly. But on significant changes. So, for example, the European Convention of Human Rights, which was first drafted by Winston Churchill. And when the European Commission was formed, of which Britain, the UK, was a part, not a part of the common market, European Union now, but a founding member of the European Commission, this was adopted. And we recently watched a documentary made in 2007. What was it called? Do you remember? Taking Liberties.
Yeah.
Taking Liberties, which I think was a fine documentary because it showed how all of the basic planks of freedom that Winston Churchill had suggested and that had been adopted by all of the members of the European Commission had been violated in law by Tony Blair when he was Prime Minister. So, for example, a right that goes back to the year 1215 in English law, under the Magna Carta, the Great Charter, signed by King John, is the right to be released if you have not been charged with a crime within 24 hours of being apprehended. That right was suspended by Winston Churchill in 1940, as this documentary points out, when it looked as if there'd be a German invasion. And so British fascists were arrested and imprisoned. And he apologised profusely for doing this and said it was a violation of liberties, but it seemed necessary. It is interesting that he didn't decide to keep them until the end of the war. As soon as the threat of imminent invasion was over, they were released. And he apologised again. Tony Blair wanted to be able to imprison anybody for 90 days without charging them with a crime. And it was clear that he wanted to do this because you can soften people up in custody. Because, the only person who's going to give you any more information is that person. And you can do that by the standard method of sleep deprivation, the royal road to confession, according to one Guantanamo Bay interrogator. You can confuse and mess somebody up so much. We had the Guildford Four, the Birmingham Six, who were people who went to prison for offences they did not commit that were actually committed by the Provisional Irish Republican Army, because they were put into a situation where you get this thing where they'll say, look, just sign the document and we'll let you go.
Yeah.
You're nicked. Now, luckily, Tony Blair didn't get his way, 90 days, but he did get 28 days. And I would like to see habeas corpus returned because it is authoritarian violating that. If you don't have evidence to charge somebody with a crime, not necessarily to convict them, but to charge them with a crime, you have no right to hold them. And that is a human right. So we've seen actually a creep of authoritarianism. We're in this situation now with COVID-19, where our liberties have been massively restricted. A guy was arrested in Wales. This was great, wasn't it, on the news? I think he was arrested now 6 times for driving his car. And this is against the police rules, that he's not isolating himself. And you kind of go, he's in a car.
Yeah. So we pulled him over, got him to roll down the window, and he coughed all over us.
It's like, and I'm not a great fan of the automobile. I never have been. I think it's a rotten thing that's destroying the world, and the idea of everybody having their personal pod to drive around in seems to me wasteful and silly, especially as it's, the manufacture of a car is actually 50% of the destruction of the environment it will cause in its lifetime, and you can't recycle the parts from it, despite the Germans labelling them so patiently. It's this kind of plastic and that kind of plastic. Most of it, because you can't reuse the steel. You have to have virgin, newly made steel to make cars, folks. So I'm told. I'm sure somebody will write in the comments. It's not actually true. It can be 95% rubbish. So it's a silly thing to do. But nonetheless, I can't see how this guy is endangering anybody. But I can see how the police are being busybodies and revelling in their authority, which is something I'm afraid I have seen face to face in my life a number of times. Sometimes authority is necessary. Children should do as they're told, shouldn't they, Sam?
Yes.
There's some chance.
Yeah, no.
But to be authoritarian, to believe that democracy is wrong and that we can trust in great leaders like Genghis Khan, Hitler, Stalin, Mao.
Mao's my favourite.
Mao is actually the greatest mass murderer of all time. But you can't say that on any medium that is distributed in China. And there's a great big picture of him in Tiananmen Square, the great smiling man. This is a man whose favourite preoccupation was watching torture. Go and read, what's her name, Jung Chang and John Halliday's book, the biography. I tried to read it and had to give up because it's just horrifying that a man like this could achieve power. So I do actually believe in democracy. Somebody suggested to me that I was left of centre the other week in the comments. And I'd just like to say I'm centre of centre. I believe in democracy. I don't believe in everybody being exactly the same, because we aren't. I don't believe in a state that controls everything, because that doesn't seem to work very well. And you look at the Russian system where they made what was it that Khrushchev, when he became leader, complained that to keep up with their quotas, the chandeliers were now so heavy that they would kill you if they fell on you, because they were using, and the sofas got bigger every year to use more wood. You get into these stupid ideas where you have state control. On the other hand, to have the state involved in such a thing as a health system, I think will prove to have been very useful in Europe and those parts of Asia, like South Korea, and indeed in China. And to not actually value all of the people of your country so that you want them to have good health, to me seems antisocial.
Yeah.
Is that the right term?
I think so. And as you said, if you have a part of your population that doesn't have access to it, they're going to get infected and they're going to transmit it to you.
Yeah, the
herd immunity.
Yeah, and to do that, to conquer disease, you need to have an integrated policy. It doesn't need to become a bureaucratic nightmare necessarily, as our national health system most certainly is. At the other end, the idea that some individual like Joseph Jougashvili, the man of steel, Stalin, should be in charge. Go and watch the great movie, Armando Iannucci's movie, The Death of Stalin, which is hilarious and true, pretty much, which shows you what happens in an ultra-authoritarian state, that he dies, nobody dares go in the room because you're likely to be put on the list if you annoy him. And you have the situation where Michael Palin, as, spoiler here, spoiler alert, Michael Palin as Molotov, the inventor of the cocktail, is told that his wife is on the list to be executed, and basically says, well, Comrade Stalin must have had a good reason for it. And he lives with the woman, and he's got no idea what she might have done. But authoritarianism means that you believe what you're ordered to do. And we don't think you should. We think that you should think about stuff, talk about stuff, and assert your rights politely. and non-violently, preferably. And anything you want to?
No, not really.
Not really. So that's that, really. Thank you very much. I'm John Atack.
I'm Sam Atack.
Bye. Children should do as they're told, shouldn't they, Sam?
Yes.